Yeah, it's a very interesting. I've been looking forward to it. I'm like, I don't even know why, but I'm
Staying for it.
it.
Oh, okay. Because there's going to be a live stream as well. A live stream. If you want to watch it. They're going to broadcast it.
Hi, good evening everybody. We've got to start because the time is still a bit of an issue. Hopefully I'm going to manage to keep my own time check here, but let's hope we can get it all done by 7:30. Today we're going to be addressing cannabis in Pan-African context. I'm Andre Lucasine, and the speaker that will be following are Marius de Kock and Myrtle Clark from Fields of Green for All. Bit about myself. I'm unfortunately best known for smoking the joint on TV, but I've been a cannabis activist for the past 16 years. I started the Global Cannabis March in Cape Town and have been there every step of the way, seeing it grow to 15,000 participants annually. I've engaged government at municipal, provincial and national level, peacefully in the streets, through meetings with heads of government and government departments, including agriculture, the Medicines Control Council, health, SAPS, the Central Drug Authority, who unfortunately the representative bailed, and the Department of Social Development at the Cannabis Roundtable. Despite our government spending over 1 billion rand researching cannabis, they've got no usable information to offer. Thus, I've had to educate myself. So in the past 16 years, I've done many things with cannabis. I've grown it in 3 SADC countries, demonstrated to the government how you can build houses from it, as has Tony, actually. So it's not just myself. I've worked with the largest cannabis clone propagator in the United States, where we provided clones to the Berkeley Patients Group and the Harborside Clinic, the oldest and largest cannabis dispensaries in San Francisco and the United States. And I've seen brain tumors treated in vitro with cannabis oil, and I've seen cancer tumors, brain cancer patients treated with cannabis oil, as well as many other patients with a variety of ailments. I've sold cannabis concentrations to members of our own parliament. I've researched it, advocated for it, publicly debated it, was a co-author about a book about it, and yes, I am serious about cannabis. I'm currently employed in the legal cannabis environment as an international regulations and cultivation expert, and I can tell you from my personal direct experience that there's never been a better time to pay close attention to the legal status, science and the business of cannabis in modern civilization than right now. The Single Convention Treaty is now officially outdated and in dire need of revision. I'll start with the most recent realizations that cannabis prohibition is racist. Our racist past is no longer part of our society, and I would assume we all agree that it shouldn't be. This is why we need to review cannabis prohibition, the last remnant of apartheid law, with factual explanations, not the claptrap or xenophobic excuses we have been seeing from our so-called advisors. I'll get back to this later. It's unfortunate David's not in the room. In this report from the President, the Office of the President of the United States, titled The Economic Costs of Youth Disadvantage and the High Return of Opportunities for Change, this report is an admission that the American Black and Hispanic youth are at a substantial disadvantage with regard to achieving their full potential as productive members of society. The main barrier is the fact that an extremely disproportionate amount of minorities are being introduced into the criminal justice system at an early age, most of them for minor drug-related offenses. The report states a black individual is nearly 4 times as likely as a white individual to be arrested for marijuana possession, even though black and white individuals reported using cannabis at similar rates. There it is. The White House admits the incarceration rates of cannabis are highly disproportionate and racially based. In South Africa, the low-hanging fruit as the police then start picking up the pace again, with cannabis arrest in 2002 over here, and it shot up to 140,000 per annum. A day does not go by where the police don't appear in a newspaper proudly sitting in front of some plant material looking chuffed with themselves and their ability to garden. People interacting with black people, and saw cannabis as a dangerous bridge between the cultures. Thus, they ensured it stayed prohibited, perceiving it as a danger to race relations. So-called deviants, gay men, and conscientious objectors were tested using cannabis at the Creusot military facility in Limpopo, and the findings warned that cannabis led to demotivation in white conscripts, and interaction between black and white youth. Now I'm going to just tell you a bit of personal cannabis apartheid experience from myself. In 1987, we performed a raid with the South African Police Services during my enforced military conscription, where we broke into the hostel 2:30 in the morning, woke people up, pointed guns at their faces, and effectively SAPS only arrested 2 people that evening. The one person for owning a bread knife, which he used to cut and butter bread with, and the other person for being in possession of a banky of cannabis. Now, there was no other reason for this arrest, aside from the cannabis, and it was the reason used to justify this apartheid racially based fear and intimidation. SAPS deserted us, and the army was left to walk back to the police station, where by the time we got there, we found that SAPS had knocked off, and they'd left the banky in an unlocked evidence drawer. We smoked it, destroying the banky, and therefore the evidence that led to these men being arrested in the first place. I personally was instructed during the apartheid regime to point my gun at a black person for no other reason that he was in possession of cannabis. I have experienced this racist law. It was as reprehensible back then as it is now. And this law comes from this. The Natal immigrants, the 1887, which was actually 100 years prior to my racist involvement, the report for the Indian Immigration Commission of the Natal Colony states, hemp is as baneful for the Indian people as for black people. It linked cannabis and hemp to crime, laziness, and quote, dacha insanity. Concern spread to the international stage when South Africa asked the League of Nations, a precursor to the United Nations, to add hemp to a list of banned drugs in 1923 because it was the most important of all habit-forming drugs. This is where it all started. Sure, prohibition is couched in feel-good terms like preventing harm to society, but what harm exactly? That whites, blacks, coloreds, and Indians may mix socially? And what society? Because the society in question was colonial. Was this the white colonial minority with their Victorian morals that actually are not compatible with Africa? This is the real truth behind cannabis prohibition. It's the last unreviewed apartheid law, the South African Drugs and Drugs Trafficking Act of 1992. And if left, South Africa is putting policy pressure on other African countries to continue in the vein of this law, the 1992 Drugs and Drugs Trafficking Act. It's extremely harmful and socially disruptive to South African society. It leaves Africans in a very unique situation where the black majority is now inflicting the white minority rule black on its own black majority and ruining their lives like the masters of yore. Judge Dennis Davis says this is disastrous to put people in prison for this. Think of the thousands of lives ruined by incarceration and that has taken mothers and fathers from their children, destroyed their economic stability in families, and cost the country millions in incarceration costs and disenfranchised and otherwise contributive segments of society. This must stop, really, it must stop. We have a unique opportunity at this point in time to stop it. Unfortunately, though, we have our parliamentary advisors, like the Central Drug Authority and the Medical Research Council, which have been attending this seminar but are strangely missing right now. The Central Drug Authority started their 12-year delayed advice to the Parliamentary Committee Council, Portfolio Committee Council, sorry these names are so long, and they started it with, generally cannabis is a gateway drug for many countries. I mean, could you make a less solid statement if you tried, for fuck's sake? The CDA managed to get the parliamentary committee so confused that one of the officials who should have been left wiser commented, "How can you treat cancer with a carcinogen?" So much for making things clearer in any form. With over 6,000 studies on health effects of cannabis being published in the United States today, there's no evidence that cannabis is a carcinogen, quite the contrary in fact. My last engagement with the Central Drug Authority and the ever-missing David Bayer, it was painstakingly pointed out that cannabis will be dealt with in a small compartmentalized pocket of medical application here, hemp over there, this molecule now, that one later, and so on. But once again, missed the point that all cannabis is cannabis. It's not like control at a molecular level has ever worked in preventing cannabis being grown in South Africa, or anywhere for that matter. Or that you can grow a molecule without growing the plant. At some point, we as a society are going to have to grasp the nettle and deal with cannabis, the issue in its entirety. Further wisdom, pearls of wisdom from the Central Drug Authority to the policymakers of Parliament was that Section 21 applications can be made on behalf of patients to access cannabis for medicinal purposes. No, that's not true. I've tried, I promise you, I have tried. This is the advisor to the Parliamentary Health Committee, lying effectively. Anyway, let me tell you a bit more about these advisors and their chicken lick and skyfall reasoning. It is said that cannabis was safer than alcohol. I'm quoting it from this presentation to Parliament. That cannabis is safer to alcohol and many other substances and did not have many recognizable effects because the onset of problems associated with cannabis were not seen immediately. A person imbibing alcohol was immediately seen to be under the influence. Unfortunately, with cannabis, there are no long-term effects which developed after a period of time, and therefore the damage that was being seen would be recognized only in the long term. That is why the CDA was saying that one of the needs to be careful about saying cannabis was safer. Now, if I can just address this, a person imbibing alcohol not immediately to be seen under, was immediately to be seen under the influence. So like after one beer you're drunk, after one glass of wine you're drunk. Where's he getting this information? This is a parliamentary advisor. What kind of drugs is he on? And that cannabis is something that you don't feel the effect of until a long term. Come on, no really? There's people in this room that know after one or two tokes of a joint that you can actually feel the effects immediately. And you know who you are. I know that that's true. David Bayer has no clue what is going on. I continue, quoting them. The smoking of cannabis was linked to cardiovascular and respiratory disorders, cognitive impairment, mental disorders, and associated neural spasticity which could not be cured. Honestly, please show me that one patient who's Neural spasticity was not cured that you're talking about. Really. It would be so nice to just meet this guy. And in fact, and here's a fact, people, that the THC content in South Africa was much higher, and acute marijuana use associated with the increased motor vehicle accidents and fatal crashes and the carnage already on South Africa roads as well known. Right. Data from the United States of Colorado and Washington after several years of legalization has fully debunked this and all these assertions. Thus, the advisors who made these claims should be subject to censure at the very least, and they should be replaced with actual experts who are educated in the actual facts. The Medical Research Council presented their policy brief, which despite their rigorous R bias again, somehow managed to find only the scientific reports that showed the least efficacy regarding cannabis and medical use. These advisors are missing the point entirely. Their personal bias, seeking the data that reinforces their preconceived beliefs. And it's having a catastrophic effect on South African society. Regulating a plant because of a molecule, the new rationalization, is in fact supporting the racist prohibition, which has not been successful, has turned harmless people into criminals, ruined the lives of citizens, and has turned and through their advice and mistruths and half-truths, while trivializing any valid pro-cannabis point being made, or simply by shoveling their heads into the sand to avoid seeing the larger picture. What's worse, once again, in a very South African way, we are exporting this shit. In 2002, with funding from the the European Union, 3 biannual meetings of the SADC Drug Control Committee were held. The regional workshop for national drug control coordinating bodies was conducted where national drug control strategies or drug master plans were drafted by the member states that didn't have them. The member states that had completed their drug master plans reviewed the status of their implementation, and at a workshop, SADC provided technical advice, funding, and for national workshops for the finalization of their drug master plans. Cannabis was in Africa long before the white man came. As you saw from our first slide, it was like 2000, 3000 BC type stuff. And never left when the colonial white man's law was introduced, or has yet for that matter. In fact, it's doing pretty well, even with this harmful, outdated, unenforceable, and racist law. The jobs of the advisors is to ensure that medicine in the country, and through their influence other African countries, is safe and effective. As such, they absolutely must deal with the toxicity of all drugs. Not once has either the Central Drug Authority, the Medicines Control Council, the Medical Research Council, or the International Narcotics Control Board, and I see Lachanaidu not here either, or the brand new SAPRA, has ever mentioned the lethal dose of cannabis, or the effective dose of cannabis, or the toxic dose of cannabis, or the therapeutic index of cannabis, or the therapeutic ratio of cannabis, which are all terms standard to their mandate. These are the scientific terms that they should be using to advise citizens in Parliament on the safety of a drug, and I can only assume that this oversight can't be because of their unprofessionalism, but rather due to the concerns about the negative outcomes of political pressure they may face. This is rich when you consider this, that the biggest ever review has found pharmaceutical companies were accused of failing to report side effects and even deaths linked to drugs. An analysis of 70 trials of the most common antidepressants involving more than 18,000 people found that they doubled the risk of suicide and aggressive behavior in under 18s. The authors said misreporting of trial data could have led to a serious underestimation of harms of these antidepressants, which are apparently safer than that plant up there that's never caused a death in like 3,000 years. People like Dr. Joey Gous of the Medicines Control Council and our International Narcotic Control Board fellows, it's their job to make sure pharmaceuticals are safe and effective. David Bayover, I'm harping once again, is not here, but he's a bee farm. He's a pharmacist. And David Bayover, Joey Gous, and Lachin Naidu, people that are actually at this conference, are more than likely complicit in the prescription of some of these pills that I'm talking about, and are probably complicit in the subsequent suicide and death of a patient. In the past 3,000 years, cannabis has been used by humankind, and then still has got the nerve to tell Parliament that there's been no long-term trials. They are happy to advise internally and through the National Drug Master Plan that they're exporting to other African countries, yet they fail to see the drug explosion that has happened under their own watch in the past 15 years. Exporting bad drug policy must stop. The system is backwards and blind. And you know, the sky did not fall. Still hasn't fallen. Washington, Colorado, Alaska, Oregon, Uruguay have legalized and regulated cannabis for adults. It's been a few since yet, a few years, and still no headline, hey? Really, it hasn't happened. In fact, it's been quite the opposite. Let's take Washington with a similar GDP size to South Africa, for example. Amendment 64 was passed 2 years ago, and it's been a much more successful implementation than, say, e-tolling in South Africa over the same time period. Over 10,000 jobs were created in the first 6 months. This excludes triple that in ancillary services that have grown to support the industry. Labeling, health and safety standards have been standardized. Plants and product that has failed pesticide testing has been recalled and kept out of the market, thus ensuring customer safety. Industries and entrepreneurs have stepped up to the plate with the sales totaling $3.2 million a day of legal cannabis. In 2015, that figure was $6 billion. Underage usage is down. And yes, opioid prescription pill overdoses are down by 25% in all 23 states with a regulated cannabis program. I'm sure Vermont, Kentucky, New York, New Jersey, Nevada, California, and the remainder of the other US states aiming for regulated adult cannabis in 2016 will experience similar benefits in the coming years, and still, the sky has not fallen. Mexico and Canada have made their moves toward legal adult use. And with that, effectively now the entire North American bloc is in contravention of the Single Convention Drug Treaty with regard to scheduling and control of cannabis. It's time Africa makes up its own mind as to whether to even be a signatory to this treaty, or if this treaty is even valid. It would suit us to revoke our international commitments in this regard and make good of what cannabis can bring society, rather than worry about outdated, irrelevant laws which are ignored by the West anyway. Even if we don't formally revoke our commitments, the US and Uruguay and Bolivia have shown that adherence to the treaty is no longer required, and no negative consequence will be sustained if any African country is to be found in violation. Here in the Western Cape, this is the kind of thing that the mayor does every 5 years just before municipal elections. She decides to talk big about drugs because it's political Viagra for her. She was invited to this. Did she come? No. She would rather put a Visage on the front, or on the side of a building. It talks about a drug problem, but it's got her fucking face on it. I'm sorry, that pisses me off. That thing costs so much money, and it doesn't really address the drug situation. All it does is tell, look, there's the pretty mayor. Here's a solution, people. Cannabis controllable, it can be done. Drugs are regulated in society, as we've heard, from the illicit through to the licit and the medical. We can do it here in South Africa, we can do it throughout Africa. It's happening all over the place, and I promise you the sky is not falling. With the main aims of the Cannabis Control Bill, harm reduction and age restriction, addressing the legal issues, I'm sure hopefully Marius will deal with that, methods of regulation, and it's a pragmatic approach. It goes through things like licensing structure, label, warning, these are pretty simple concepts. We can understand that it's only 2 or 3 pages. It's a tier system, pretty much like any other agricultural system, where you've got your growers, your industry, your producers, and retail, of course. Really, people, can we keep calm and catch up? Because look what's in Africa. Nice. I don't know if it's gonna work. Is it opening? No. They just
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Marius de Kock, and I'm an attorney. I wonder if we should maybe ask the first question. Are there any adults, are there any parents in the room? Can we have a show of hands, parents? All right. For those of you who are not parents, I would like to introduce you to your imaginary child. You haven't met him yet. Here he is. You love him a lot. And if you were to go into your child's room and find some cannabis in your child's room, my question to you is, would you call the police? Would you rush off and think, I need to call the police? Or would you talk to the child? Could we have a show of hands, who here would call the police? Who here is thinking, I need to call the police on my child? Okay, can we have a show of hands? Who here is going to talk to the child? Alright, I see there's some non-committed.
My child's
Non-committed.
6 to 9, so there shouldn't be any cannabis in there.
Well, I'll talk to you about that in a moment because, well, let's go talk about that in a moment because you see, every parent wants to think this, and this is the only thing that they can offer you, that it's peer pressure, that it's not my child, it's someone else's child. Someone else's child is influencing my child. It's not my child's curious, it's that someone else, I can blame someone else. Alright, so maybe we get onto the statistics first. Let's stop this.
Is there a pause?
It's not a pause there. So those are the national arrests. These are the national arrests for drug-related offences. Okay. I'll go back. We're going to have to flip here. But you can see the numbers starting here in 2004, climbing from 60,000 to 260,000 per annum in 2014. All right. Here's the Western Cape. Yeah. Just maximize that. Okay. Here's the Western Cape. It's gone from 30,000. From 30,000 to 88,000. Right? These are the numbers. I was going to tell the story about how the Western Cape is unique and special, and it's like the DA, and it's like war on drugs here. But in fact, that story is not, strictly speaking, true. Because Gauteng, you look at their numbers, going from 10,000 to 70,000 in 10 years. Yeah? Eastern Cape, not so much. Yeah. So all the evidence is that the war on drugs has failed. Each year, according to the Central Drug Authority, there are more drugs, more drug users, more drug arrests than the year before. Right? The CDA admits this much in their annual reports. Right? The Central Strategy of Supply Reduction has been a total failure. More worrying than this has been what has accompanied it. All kinds of other drugs have also entered the market. Heroin, methamphetamines. And these drugs are now available in every suburb, in every town of this country, and often on every street corner. You know, this is where the war on drugs has brought us to. Right? No other policy can be blamed, simply because South Africa's never had another policy. Right? The South African police reveal what is a failure. This is not about how bad it is. This is not our success. This is a failure, right? Because the point of this Central Drug Authority, the point of drug war, was to stop the supply of drugs. And this tells us the supply has gone up. Now locally we have the Democratic Alliance in charge, and I just want to say something about that, because there have been some people in the party who put their hand up and say, I want to say something about drugs, I want to say something about the legalization of drugs. And those people weren't listened to. All they said to them was, get out of the party. Alright? That's where we're at. We don't want to have a discussion about drugs. It doesn't suit us. How does this African Police Service attain these numbers? Right? There are certain tactics that they engage in, and I want to tell you about some of these tactics because some of them might rile you and might upset you. Right? The first tactic is essentially profiling and stopping and searching people. If you look like someone, if you go into the African market in town, if you walk down the street, if you look in a certain way, the police feel free to push you up against the wall, search your pockets, and then if they find something, their search was justified. Occasionally it happens that they don't find something, and those people come to me and say, you know, are you in a jury? What can I do? And there's nothing. There's no real recourse for those people. Right? This profiling goes further, because this profiling goes into where you don't see it. This profiling happens in Mitchell's Plain, where the people who are being profiled are young coloured people. This is a very racial thing. If you don't think so, I suggest you go to the Mitchell's Plain court and see what's going on there. Right? The proportion of white people arrested to the proportion of black people is vastly in favour of the suppression of black people. This is not funny, it's true. Right? Then we want to talk about the Rastafarians for a moment, because the Constitutional Court considered Rastafarians' position and said, well, we're going to listen to you and hear you. And then at the end of it all, they decided, look, your religion is just not defined enough, it's not good enough. And so now the police believe that the Rastafarians are fair game. If you're a Rastafarian, if you wear Rastafarian garb outside, expect to get pushed up against the wall because the police believe you to have cannabis. If they find it, their search is justified. I have heard from so many Rastafarians that if you go outside of a Rastafarian, the police will search you. I don't know what other religion or what other situation we have where we have an entire religion which forms the basis of a suppression like this. You go outside, you will be arrested. Now, I don't believe in Rastafarianism. I don't believe in any religion. I believe they're all equally ridiculous. But I want to say this. If your grandfather is a Rastafarian, and your parents are Rastafarians, and all their friends are Rastafarians, and they all come around and smoke, what are you expecting the child to grow up as? A Catholic? You have to be realistic. This is a long-term thing, and there's a long-term persecution. I want to quickly tell you about a tactic I call sitting eggs, and one of my clients had this. What the police do is they know where the drug houses are. They know where they are. So what the police will do is they'll drive around the block, and they'll drive around the block, and they'll drive around the block. And each time they come around, they look, is someone coming out? Because if someone's coming out, now we've got our chance. We push the person against the wall and we arrest them for possession. And we will not see the police going into that house and stopping the source of the problem. They don't want to kill the goose that lays the golden eggs. That interrupts with this situation here. Then I'd like to tell you the police have targets. The police will tell you they don't have targets. I'm telling you they're lying. Okay? Do you need proof? Can you open your eyes? The police have targets. There they are. This photo I took Woodstock Police Station. No arguments here. They have targets, and this is what it's about. Making up the numbers. And it's about going after the lowest hanging fruit. Okay, then I wanted to quickly tell you about a tactic called a cluster operation. In terms of section 12.7a of the Police Act, the police are authorized on the basis of public safety to cordon off an area. And to my mind, someone's got some radioactive material, fine. But no, what the police do is they go and cordon off an area, invariably poor black people living in a shack. And then they will do a cluster operation and they will search every premises there. They'll go in, they'll tip the person's life upside down, and if they find something, pat themselves in the back. You found something, you win. Okay? This is where the police are, this is what the police do. This is a misuse of that law. The police that want to search your house really can go in terms of this Criminal Procedure Act. Alright, then the fourth tactic I want to tell you about is raiding homes, with and or without warrants. Right? Now this happened to my house, right? So I'm going to turn this, I can tell you a bit about this. And the police came, in the form of the Tactical Response Team. They came, guns drawn, shotguns and balaclavas, right? Broke every lock in the house, okay? My tenants, hands up, don't know, hey, get on the ground, fine. Police find nothing, all right? They came to accuse me, the house, whatever, of cultivation of cannabis, okay? They find nothing. Then the policemen go into my tenant's bedroom. She's a young female, 23-year-old, very attractive. 5 policemen, shotguns and balaclavas, and they go through her underwear, holding it up one by one, for everybody in that room to see, all right? This is about cultivation of cannabis. We're going through people's underwear. This is not, this is where the war drugs is at, okay? And finally, I want to just say something. Regular policing. Citizens are not paranoid enough, and they're not discreet enough. Okay. Now, what does all this mean? Okay, what does all this mean? How do the police deal with this? And I'll tell you, there's a way the police deal with this. And I call it opening the cage door. Nobody is ready to be arrested. Nobody is ready to have your freedom taken away. So now they process you. You have to, they need to confirm your address. They need to take your fingerprints, open a docket. This all takes time. Okay? And then they say to you, do you want to go? Do you want to leave? Do you want your freedom? Have you got 300 rand? They don't say to you, now you will be signing an admission of guilt fine and it will ruin your life. They don't say that. They just say, have you got 300 rand? You can go. Okay? You know, the thing is that if you're arrested for your first time for cannabis and this happens, you know, the police themselves are entitled to grant you bail. Okay? They will never tell you this. They would rather kill the matter here. They want to kill the matter here because they don't want to go to court. They don't want to do the paperwork. They want an admission of guilt fine because that's a clean success. Now, one thing I have seen, which I call a variant of opening the cage door, they catch 4 youngsters in a car with cannabis. Now they put all 4 people in a cell because the person whose cannabis is, if it's one of them, doesn't want to say it's mine, right? They would rather imprison 3 people for a weekend falsely than knowingly falsely imprison people for a weekend so that those people can pressure the person whose it is into confessing so that they can get their confession, admission of guilt fine and they can move on. This is where the war of drugs is at. The South African police are brutal and violent in execution of their duties. Right? In my research, I have found that people have been shot and killed for running, for smoking a joint. A person was thrown in Camps Bay, was thrown into his van and he had his neck broken. He's paralyzed. One of my friends down at the atrium, he was caught with a joint. He stole the joint from the cops and he ate it. And it seemed quite funny. Except the cops then, they thought, no ways, now we're going to get you. They broke a rib. They handcuffed him, they broke his nose, then they pepper sprayed him. Totally unnecessary. Because the police have a reason, okay? And this is something. Why do the police do this? Why are the police so good at their job? Because cannabis is a form of supplementary income for them. They are stealing from the people who they are busting and they are selling it. And this has been a recurrent theme throughout the time that I practiced in this drug field, that the police are stealing from the people and they are selling it. You need to know this. Because what you need to know is that, you know, our police, they're great gardeners, they're good at it. This fantastic use of their time, there they go. They're good at this. They are actually very good at this. Right? What you need to realize is it's not a war on drugs, it's a war on people. They are people. And then let's talk about children. Everyone wants to talk about children. What about the children? Because the children are the most vulnerable. The children are the people who need protecting most. And what do you have? You have drugs available for these children. These children don't have trouble finding drugs or getting hold of drugs. And so what do the police do? Well, we have to search all the children. We'll push them all against the wall. No, that's what we need to do. We need to push all the kids against the wall, accuse all of them falsely, because out of all those kids, only one or two will be in possession of something. All those kids get false accusations. Nobody thinks about this. Yeah, there we go. Now, I must tell you something about all these searches. Not one of these searches where the press has been invited along has actually occurred in terms of the regulations which cover these searches. There's a comprehensive set of regulations, and they ignore them consistently. This is not the way it's supposed to be. Yeah? Bring up the dogs. Because, you know, the students, they really need this. Now, I quickly want to talk about the Central Drug Authority, and I hear Andre is rather upset with them, and the experts that are there. I want to say something, that if you look at the war on drugs, and you look at what it was set out to achieve, and the metrics, and it was supposed to be supply reduction, and demand reduction, and all these things, by those metrics, the Central Drug Authority have failed. They failed badly. There's no single metric which the Central Drug Authority can turn around to us and say, well, look at this bright silver lining to a cloud. There's nothing. There's nothing for us. The Central Drug Authority and all these people, they must resign. They must go and find something else to do with their time. You know, if you challenge the Central Drug Authority and say, why is cannabis illegal? They'll tell you, gateway theory. I'm going to tell you something, the gateway theory is not a theory. A theory is a proposition which can be tested and is supported by evidence, or not. You know? Theories require explanation for causation, not mere statistical associations. The only thing the gateway theory can and does show is that curious people are curious. And that once the line of legality has been crossed, it doesn't matter anymore. Right? I have a better theory. It's called the forbidden fruit theory. And the theory really goes like this. The quicker you want something to happen, just ban it. Prohibit what you want to happen and it happens. Where's my evidence? There. Loss. War on drugs. The evidence is there. You know? Harm reduction. Can I just say something about harm reduction? Because this is a big topic for everybody and everyone wants to say something. Harm reduction. There is no greater harm for a drug user or somebody who has a medical problem like that than to be arrested and to be saddled with a criminal conviction that lasts with them for 10, 15 years. You know? If you have a medical problem, you go to your doctor and say, Doc, I've got a problem. Help. What's he going to say to you? 2 weeks in Paulsma. Really? No doctor is going to want to do that. But that's what the criminalization of a medical problem ends up at. People are scared to talk about it. People don't want to go see the doctor. They have a problem, but now they're stigmatized. You know, the first casualty of war is the truth, and the government has chosen just to engage in just blatant propaganda. Just propaganda, lies, exaggeration. Okay, and you need to be honest and nuanced, but because if you lie and you exaggerate, you lack credibility. And the people who go out there and they test what you say. They say, that man says if I do this, that will happen. No wonder people are ignoring the message, because the message is a lie. And when people find out it's a lie, then they think that all the messages are a lie. So then they go and they do some cannabis or whatever. And then they end up doing binge. You know, really? If you think about the information, I actually brought a box of Panade along. If you think about the amount of information that you get when you go out there to the shop, and you pick up a box of Panade, okay, and compare that to the amount of information that you're going to get when you go to the street corner, you'll buy a drug. I mean, it's not even close. I mean, the Panade has got a whole long story with it. I mean, it's two sides. I mean, it's fancy, you know. For a young person, a curious person, what information can they base their decisions on? There's nothing. The government's got nothing for us. I think I'm very much done, ladies and gentlemen. The future. The future's bleak. South Africa's not ready for a conversation about drugs. The government doesn't want to hear. The EFF are well-meaning as they are, have nationalised cannabis without objection from the rest of Parliament one day during their session. I mean, nothing's going to change from this country. There will be no legalisation coming from here. We are pushing the war on drugs internally into Africa, and the best thing that can happen is for the other countries, for the US and for Canada and for Mexico and for Uruguay now to actually just finally get so far into default in their international treaty obligations, that we will say, well, what is this now? Okay? I would just say that the rest of Africa mustn't listen to South African officials. Don't listen. If they come to you to ask them, where is the evidence? I'm looking for evidence. I'm not looking for exaggeration. I'm looking for stories. I'm looking for evidence, real evidence. You know? You must challenge these people, right? You know, the war on drugs has been really sad, and it's not going to get better. It's not going to get better here anytime soon. Quite simply because the vast majority of the people in this country believe the propaganda. It's been so long that the propaganda has been flooding their brains that everybody now just walks around with this saying, drugs is bad, we've got to stop this is terrible. You know? The drugs in and of themselves aren't bad. They are what they are. They have their effects. They need to be controlled. People need to be honest about this. Anyway, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for listening.
Okay, Myrtle's just doing some recording issues there. And Myrtle, welcome.
Hello everybody, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak at this esteemed gathering. I must say that yesterday and today has been incredibly interesting. I don't think we've ever had such a diverse lot of people gathered here in South Africa to discuss all of these really important issues. My name is Myrtle Clark, and I'm here representing Fields of Green for All, cannabis legalization non-profit company. I'm afraid I have to beg to differ with Marius. I'm incredibly positive about drug policy in South Africa, and I'm incredibly positive about the progress that we're making with cannabis legalization. To put this, is this mic working properly?
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay. To put this talk into context, these are some of the day-to-day issues we deal with in our quest to legalize the most researched plant on the planet. So, is it going? Is it on? Going wrong? Because it should be on the previous slide.
There you go.
Okay, so these are some of the day-to-day issues we deal with in our quest to legalize the most researched plant on the planet. I put forced crop eradication at the top of the list because this is a major issue that we're dealing with right now, and I'm going to be speaking about that in a bit more detail. Equality for everybody under the law is really important. We've gone through all of the harms of prohibition, and to provide access for people who are arrested on cannabis charges is a major part of what we do, because most people are ignorant of their rights under the law and not aware that we are all equal under the law. So people often come to our organization for help when they're arrested, and that certainly takes up quite a lot of our time. Educating people and reducing the stigma. There's been a lot of talk about that at this conference, the reducing of stigma. It's obviously something that we do in our work. The preparation for what we're calling the trial of the plant. And that's the thing that keeps us the second most busy at the moment after the forced crop eradication, and I'll be dealing with that in a bit of detail. The harms of prohibition, and I think that those have been extensively covered this evening already. One has to pay the rent and feed the family, as it were, and most of our fundraising is done through events. Cannabis legalization is not exactly the most funded thing in the world. It's either a no-go area for some funders, or it's an area that has already been dealt with. Because there are certain areas around the world that have already legalized cannabis, cannabis has kind of slipped down the priority list for funders. So our organization is largely self-funded through events that we hold for the cannabis community in South Africa. And we're really proud of the fact that we've been generating enough funds on our own for the last 5 years to have made the progress that we've made and to be standing in front of you today. So that's also something that we do. Formulating future policy and engagement with lawmakers is something that we haven't really done much of until now. And the rest of my talk will tell you what we've done so far, but it might just become something that keeps us very busy in the future. But we don't really know what the future holds in terms of policy, so our strategy is just to do the best that we can and to engage with as many people as we possibly can and learn along the way what the best way is to deal with issues of drug policy. So cannabis has been grown on the eastern coast of southern Africa for at least the last 500 years. And isn't this just a beautiful plant? So I want you to bear in mind this incredibly beautiful field that we took a photograph of in the Eastern Cape. Just remember this image in your mind. For the last 16 years, South African Police Service has conducted a regular program of forced eradication of cannabis plants. We would like to emphasize that this practice started in the year 2000, 6 years into our young democracy. This is not the actions of the apartheid government. This is the actions of our new democratic government. The following are the most disturbing issues we discovered when we were visiting a remote rural area in the Eastern Cape province in early 2015. And if you look on the Daka couple's YouTube channel, you'll see a short video called Police in Helicopters. And that is the documentary evidence from a little visit. The areas targeted for spraying are in pristine rural areas renowned for their unique biodiversity. Anybody who has ever been to what was formerly known as the Transkei, the Ponderland region, will know how unique the biodiversity is there. The spraying happens within 4 weeks of the cannabis crops being ready to harvest. The spraying is indiscriminate with no regard to food crops, homesteads, livestock, river courses, or people. Spraying is executed with small helicopters that are able to fly very low over the affected areas, low enough for the pilots to laugh at the people as they are disgorging their poison. I know this might seem like a funny little anecdote to put in, but when you visit the villages, you visit one village after another, everybody tells you that same story about pilots laughing out of the windows of their helicopters. And I think that that goes a bit beyond just doing a job. In a desperate attempt to recoup losses, farmers often sell plants or parts of plants that have not been directly hit by the poison, thus exposing users to dangerously contaminated cannabis. No environmental impact assessment has ever been carried out in the areas prior to the spraying. There is a feeling that these rural people are being taken for granted with the oversights in terms of environmental laws surrounding such an enclave of pristine biodiversity. These farmers have no recourse to the law, and this is where it becomes a human rights issue. Should the police arrive on the ground and arrest the farmers for cultivation and confiscate their crops as evidence, we as an organization, and South Africa in general, would be in a position to help the farmers in a court of law. Indiscriminate aerial spraying not only has the potential to damage their health, that of their families, their animals, and their environment, it is also a serious violation of the human rights and equality before the law. The arbitrary nature of crop eradication leaves many on the ground in a state of bewilderment. One farmer asked why the government never came and sat down and explained to them why they are not allowed to grow cannabis. And you would think, us middle-class whites going to the rural area, you just assume that the farmers on the ground know why cannabis is illegal and know why this is happening to them. And when I said to this one farmer, well, the government doesn't want you to grow cannabis because cannabis is bad for you. And he literally just laughed and said, how can they say it's bad for you? I use it for myself. I use it for my animals. I sell it to pay school fees. What's so bad about that? So the disconnect between the policymakers and the people in the rural areas who are most affected by this particularly awful practice is vast. It's very upsetting. Despite wide, that's the area on the left there of the Ponderland region that's been sprayed, the green areas there. The arbitrary nature, despite widespread media exposure and even mention in Parliament during 2015, we have no evidence that the South African police will not be back in a few weeks' time. This is a really urgent issue. I very much doubt whether we're going to be able to stop them coming back right now in a few weeks' time. Attorneys acting for several interested parties have sent a letter to the South African Police Force, and the reply that we got was that there's international laws that have to be adhered to, implying that the United Nations conventions actually compel people to spray, the police service to spray. And that's really unusual because Colombia, which had a long tradition of aerial spraying of their coca bushes, saw a huge public outcry about the spraying. And they stopped spraying in 1999. And they're also signatories to the UN Single Conventions. So this is a bit of a lame excuse. So I've just gone through the list of most alarming things that we found on the ground. Now this is a list of the most alarming statements and opinions expressed by the South African authorities during our investigations last year, and this was in February 2015. A document which is called A Perspective on the Aerial Spraying of the Illicit Cannabis Crop in the Transkei by Captain J.J.H. Reader, published in 2005, is the core document that the South African Police Services use to justify the ongoing operations. This is the document that the South African authorities are using as their environmental impact assessment. It's written by a police captain. It's not written by an environmental scientist. So how can it be used as the environmental impact assessment? And I must say that in the Ponderland region, the local people are very, very aware of what is called an EIA. Doesn't matter how remote the village is that you go to. If you speak about an EIA, people know exactly what you're speaking about, because the area has also been subject to quite a bit of mining exploration. It is really, really an area that is threatened by unhealthy development. So this environmental impact assessment is a very serious issue. This document, the perspective on aerial spraying, is outdated in terms of its reference to the safety of glyphosate chemicals. And here we refer to the Institute of Science and Society's special report entitled "Why Glyphosate Should Be Banned." The South African authorities have made no effort to update their information in an age where the latest scientific studies are easily available. This study that they're using as their EIA was written in 2005, we're now in 2016. The World Health Organization has cited the International Agency for Research on Cancer as stating that glyphosate is probably carcinogenic to humans. Surely the authorities would err on the side of caution. If it is probably carcinogenic to humans, and if the World Health Organization say that, then surely you should rather just hang on a bit. Let's just do a bit of more investigation before we go poisoning our citizens. On the left there is the perspective on aerial spraying. A study for the product insert for Kilomax, the herbicide used in the 2015 spraying, shows that the most basic rules for the use of the product have been broken. There is the South African authorities use the UN conventions to justify their actions, and they use the so-called safety of this Kilomax product as a very thin smoke screen for their actions. We expect that the helicopters will be back in the rural areas in the next few weeks. We've compiled a full report with the help of an environmentalist, an environmental attorney, and activists on the ground, and this is on the Fields of Green for All website. This is just, it's not a scientific report, it's a report from activists who've gone to go and see what happens. And then that report on the website has got all of the supporting documents, including all of the documents provided for the so-called safety of the glyphosate. There are many aspects of cannabis prohibition that keep us up at night, but few are as dire and as urgent as forced crop eradication. We therefore, just to make a statement, demand that this practice is stopped immediately, or until such time as the authorities can provide the farmers on the ground with a comprehensive, independent environmental impact assessment. Fields of Green for All has been part of the Global Forum for Producers of Prohibited Plants for the last 2 years. We were honored to attend a gathering of all the members of this forum in Heemskerk in the Netherlands last month. Countries represented, and I think this is really interesting, so I'm going to tell you all the countries: Mexico, Colombia, Guatemala, Jamaica, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Paraguay, Bolivia, Peru, Indonesia, Myanmar, Albania, Morocco, Spain, and South Africa. 14 countries in all, and 60 delegates gathered at this forum in this small Dutch town, and they were all holed up in a 13th century castle for 4 days. We gathered to draw up a declaration of our demands as farmers and representatives of farmers of the opium poppy, the coca bush, and cannabis. And here I'd like to just make reference to Professor Julian Buchanan's speech last night, for those of you that were here. Professor Buchanan made a very valid point when he spoke about drug apartheid, and when he spoke about cannabis being singled out for legalization and liberalization, and that all of the drugs should be treated equally. Why is cannabis special? Now, I couldn't agree more. So I'm going to read for you the Heemskerk Declaration, and bear in mind that this was for all illicit crops. We're talking about plants here. So it was the coca leaf, the opium poppy, and cannabis. There were 12 points that were drawn up by the members of the forum. We reject prohibition and the war on drugs. We demand the removal of coca, cannabis, and opium poppy from the lists and articles in the 1961 UN Single Convention. We call for the elimination of all forms of forced eradication. We demand that all affected communities should be involved in all stages of drug policies and development, from the design to its implementation, monitoring, and evaluation. We have promised the farmers in Ponderland, and we hope to be able to extend that promise to other farmers that we visit in the future, that we will continue to shout. And that's why this point number 4 is really, really important. All affected communities should be involved. The farmers are very marginalized, and that's why I'm positive after having been to the Netherlands and met with all of the other farmers. That's why I'm positive about a drug policy change, because at last the farmers have the chance that their voices might just be heard. The conditioning of development assistance on prior eradication is unacceptable. The proper sequencing of development interventions is fundamental to its success. It often happens in rural areas that you have to eradicate your crop and then we'll give you some money and then we'll help you with development. But the condition is that you eradicate the illicit crops. Integrated sustainable development, isn't that UN speak? Should be the main intervention crop producing countries. Such development should promote and protect the livelihoods of small-scale farmers. The state and its institutions will need to assume responsibility to address the needs of the communities. We demand that the farmers and their families involved in the cultivation of these 3 crops should not be prosecuted by criminal law. Coca, cannabis, and opium poppy and their use should not be criminalized. The expansion of the illicit markets of coca, cannabis, and opium poppy should become part of development strategies. Ladies and gentlemen, we're not looking for alternative development in South Africa. We're looking for integrated development. We want to integrate our cannabis crop into a wide range of crops, into a wide range of care of the environment and use of the land. And then lastly, the farmers ended off with, we support the peace process in Colombia and Myanmar, which should be inclusive. And it was quite a sobering last point, because when you speak to the Colombians and when you speak to the people from Myanmar and the Mexicans, you realize, wow, they have some stories to tell, that's for sure. So now just to end off, I want to give you a little synopsis of what is happening with what I mentioned earlier called the trial of the plant. In 2010, myself and my partner were arrested in our home. The police knocked down our kitchen door at 2 o'clock in the morning searching for a drug lab. It was something that changed our lives forever. We've since given up our jobs in film and TV and become full-time cannabis activists. We had 3 choices when we were arrested. We could either accept our punishment, and at absolute worst, that would mean 7 to 10 years in jail, as we had quite a quantity of cannabis in our house. Our second option was, of course, this being South Africa, to pay a bribe. We even got a quote from a dodgy lawyer, and it would have cost us 40,000 Rand each, certainly much cheaper than this whole legalization business. Our third option was actually to challenge the law. So we sued 7 South African government departments. That was 5 years ago, and it's been a long road, but we're getting there, and the trial of the plant is set to begin in the Pretoria High Court this year. We're thinking that the date is going to be somewhere between May and September. The trial of the plant, the evidence will be led across 4 platforms. It's very important that this process is inclusive of all South Africans. That's why our organization is called Fields of Green for All. These 4 platforms are responsible adult use, which is the umbrella platform for all of the rest. Industrial use and scientific use, otherwise known as hemp. Medical use, and most importantly, and alluding back to the plight of the farmers, traditional, cultural, and religious use. we're going to be calling eminent experts from all over the world. Each one of our international experts will be supported by a South African expert. And some of our South African experts are also international experts. It's been a lot of hard work putting this together and actually convincing these people to come to South Africa. But these three eminent experts have agreed to come. At the top is Dr. Donald Abrahams, and you'll just bear with me as I read you his credentials. Dr. Donald Abrahams is the Chief of Hematology Oncology Division at San Francisco General Hospital and a Professor of Clinical Medicine at the University of California, San Francisco. He has an integrative oncology consultation practice at the UCFS Osher Center for Integrative Medicine. He was one of the original clinician investigators to recognize and define many early AIDS-related conditions. He has long been interested in clinical trials of complementary and alternative medicine interventions for HIV/AIDS and cancer, including evaluations of medicinal cannabis. Dr. Abrahams has published 183 peer-reviewed studies, and his CV is 30 pages long. Our second eminent expert is Dr. Carl Hart. He is a neuropsychopharmacologist, say that folks, at Columbia University in New York. He conducts research and teaches both undergraduate and graduate courses in neuroscience, psychology, and pharmacology. Dr. Hart is a world-class scientist who has been awarded multiple grants to study the complex interactions between recreational drugs and the neurobiological and environmental factors that mediate human behavior and physiology. Professor David Nutt. His name has come up quite a few times during this conference, and I think Professor Buchanan was quoting him. Famous for being fired by the UK government for saying that taking ecstasy is safer than riding a horse, David Nutt is a British psychiatrist and neuropsychopharmacologist specializing in the research of drugs that affect the brain and conditions such as addiction, anxiety, and sleep. His book, Drugs Without Hot Air, won the Transmission Prize for Communicating Science in 2014. In his book, he points out the harsh reality and that, and I quote, "The government cannot think logically about drugs." Professor Nutt is our scale of harms expert and will show the court the glaring errors in the law when it comes to the perceived harms of cannabis. These three eminent academics will be joined by other experts who will cover each and every aspect of the government's justification for keeping cannabis illegal. By fighting these unjust laws in court, we are forcing lawmakers to take cognizance of the fact that history and nearly 100 years of moral judgment, not scientific fact, has shaped cannabis law in South Africa. The challenges that lie ahead are enormous, as all concerned need to work together to ensure the enforceability of new cannabis regulations, guarding against over-regulation. Cannabis is indeed the gateway plant. And this brings me back to my comment about Professor Buchanan's lecture last night and this morning. Cannabis is the gateway plant to more just drug policy across the board for all drugs. We don't only want to single out cannabis, but right now it's taking all of our time and all of our effort and all our resources to concentrate on the cannabis plant as an organization. And we hope that our eminent experts who are going to be in South Africa to testify in the trial of the plant will be able to open the door and actually cover some ground. Dr. Carl Hart is certainly not somebody who's only concentrated on cannabis. Neither is neither is Dr. Abrahams, and neither is Professor Nutt. So we're hoping to cover some ground that will lay the path for more sensible drug policy across the board. Our government needs to find the political will to introduce more humane drug policy, and certainly, to start with, fields of green for all. Thank you very much.
Hello.
So we've only got about 15 minutes left. Does anybody have any questions for either myself, Myrtle, or Marius? Speak.
Marius, I'm
Yeah,
hoping
sure.
you'll be able to answer a question for me.
Sure.
I've read through the Drug Act of 1992, and it's a very, very broad. It says that that the plant or any parts of the plant or any products of the plant are illegal, and yet you can go and buy a hemp smoothie, you can wear hemp clothing, you can get hemp bags, you can get the seeds, you can get the oil, you can buy then also paraphernalia for smoking marijuana. And so where are they actually drawing the line for the law? How do we know if something that I want to do, how will I know if I want to make, for example, a hemp leaf into a piece of jewelry and it's not smokable, and it is, how will I know if I'm going to get thrown in jail for this?
You don't. I mean, simply the answer to your question is, the law is basically simple prohibition, and the fact of the matter is, many people, thousands, millions of people, are just ignoring it. So there is no easy answer. The reality is that if a policeman finds you with paraphernalia, they can't do anything. You know, if you're found with a leaf, you know, they're not going to prosecute you. There's no point there. But if they find you with flowered material, flowered cannabis plant, you're in trouble. It's as simple as that. You know, I don't really know if it takes further. The law is just straight up prohibition.
Thanks. I have a question for Myrtle. So as for the 4 different grounds, you talked about cannabis use for adult, and
yeah, the four platforms. More than 4
yes,
platforms. Irresponsible adult use.
yeah,
Yes.
and then there was traditional use,
Traditional, cultural,
medicinal,
and religious
yeah.
under one ground. Then medicinal and health applications. Yes.
Yeah. So my question is, when you're talking about use for religious and traditional purpose, how does it fit with whether it's for people who are 18 and above or less? I mean, whether the children think that...
Where does the children think?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's a well-known fact that the Rastafari children often imbibe, and I think that that would go under religious use and the parents' sovereignty over their children under the religious use. Yeah.
So under the religious use has got no limit for age or anything?
I think that will have to be a detail that's sorted out in the end, but I shouldn't imagine it would have, maybe, you know, Rastafari children can be exempt under parents' supervision.
But do you,
Yes,
do you think that it might lead to people not really supporting the cause because it's going to put children at risk of being exposed to
Definitely.
drugs?
Yeah, no, definitely. That's certainly is a loophole that has to be closed up. Yeah.
And my last point on that is, I have some difficulties, and I don't want to offend anybody, on the point of some people who belong to a certain religion have the right to use something that other people cannot.
For sure. In the year 2000 in South Africa, a Rastafarian lawyer was applying to be admitted to the bar, and he was refused because he had a criminal record for cannabis. So he did the same as what we're doing, and he took his case all the way to the Constitutional Court. His name is Russ Gareth Prince, and he lost on the grounds that it's not enforceable. It wasn't enforceable for the South African government to make an exception for the Rastafari people. One of the first things we did after we sued the government was actually go to an eminent academic at Pretoria University and get him to dissect the Prince case for us so that we would understand exactly why he lost. And it certainly was because of exactly what you're saying. So that is why it's all 4 platforms. We cover all use.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I was particularly, interested in, not just the presentation, but the way it was presented. The passion driving it comes from the point of, I am an affected person. And that always plays well into people understanding what's going on. The reason why I'm saying that is because I've had an experience just driving down the road, and a policeman stops me on the road and says, I want to check your boat. And I pop my boat for the man. I was looking at him through the mirror, the central mirror. And I saw him put his hand into his pocket, bring it out into my boot. And that got me thinking. So I just came out of the car, rushed around the car, and he had dropped cannabis in the boot of my car. And I picked them up and stoned him, and I almost headbutt him, and I was crazy, and I was acting like a real madman. But when I left there, my heart was really beating fast because I would have been in trouble. And that was the last time that I've ever stayed in my car to pop my boot for a police officer. I would always come out of my car, lock the door, and I would stand there until he finishes what he's doing. Now, why I'm bringing this up is because until we are affected in some way, we do not know the gravity of the situation that is involved in terms of everything that goes on with, the drugs and so on. But my concern is, I really hope that it would go, that whatever it is that you're doing would go beyond an academic exercise with the government. Sometimes you can win a debate, but you do not actually solve the issue that is on hand. People get to understand that, okay, yeah, this makes sense, I agree with it, but it doesn't really get around to do anything. My advice is, begin to show what the real issue is, the evidence in connection with the people that are involved in office. Presently now, in Nigeria, in just one state in Nigeria, we're about to come out with a bill for a drug treatment. It's a drug treatment bill, and it's going to be the very first in the West African region. The reason that has only worked out is because the governor of that state has 2 sons who have died from drug use, related issues, accidents and overdose. He has a son who is presently alive, and that particular son is using drugs very heavily. He has withdrawn him from school overseas and brought him back home. And therefore, when we speak to him, it connects with him. Now, the people in government have sons, cousins, relatives who are actually using drugs, but everybody doesn't use drugs because we've not put it on the papers. It's good to begin to confront people with the reality on the ground to know that this is, if we see it as a problem, then it's an epidemic that is also affecting all of us. Maybe we'll come to the table and come to a reasonable agreement on what we think is the way forward. I think you should begin to think about that.
I can talk loudly.
Yeah.
Marius, I know you've been working on the cannabis position paper. Can you tell me more about that?
All right. In 1999, we had the first National Drug Master Plan, and in there was something quite interesting. There was a call on the government in our actual own National Drug Master Plan to consider the decriminalization of cannabis, and it went on to some harm reduction techniques, for instance, needle replacement for heroin users. That research was done, and it was done by 2 social workers and someone from the CSIR, and it's never been released. In 2004, I obtained it, and I put it on WikiLeaks, so you can get it there if you really want. And I wouldn't really advise that you go and read it, because the African Cannabis position paper is just really another set of propaganda which just confuses the issue. One of the very interesting things in there is that there are claims made by the authors regarding cannabis and knife violence and cannabis and gangsterism. And I just want to talk about that for one moment. Because the paper was written by a lady called Lee de Rocha Silva, okay? The cannabis position paper was written by Lee Rocha-Silva, Dorothy Malaka, and another gentleman from the CSIR. And those claims regarding violence or knife crime and cannabis and gangsterism cannabis go back to Lee Rocha-Silva's own unpublished doctoral thesis. Now, I managed to get hold of this thing from the University of the North, and I read it, and it's very interesting. What they did was, in 2000, the police did a survey in the police holding cells, and they went and they saw the people and they said, right, what are you here for? And they asked them a whole series of questions. The sample was supposed to be 2,000 people, but that study only managed to cover 1,000, so we're out by a factor of 50 at this stage, okay? But what Lee Rocha-Silva then did was they did a statistical analysis of the answers that were given, and then they did an interpretation. So, if they asked a person in the cell, how easy is it to get hold of a knife? Apparently, people who smoke cannabis go, it's easy, because that's what the statistics tell them, all right? Because the people who said it's easy, statistically, had a higher, were the cannabis smokers. Cannabis smokers know that if you get a knife, you can go to the shop, all right? Or you can go to the kitchen. But now here's the thing. That question, that answer, was transmuted in this African Cannabis position paper as, if you do cannabis, you are likely to be involved in knife crime. For instance, if you see graffiti, and if you say that you see graffiti often, that would be interpreted in this doctoral thesis as you are involved in gangsterism. Understand? We are talking that we are relying on statistical associations rather than actual evidence. The South African Cannabis position paper has never been released. I had a question asked of David Baver and the CDA in Parliament. I approached a parliamentarian to ask them, where is this thing? All right? The first draft, or the only draft, was written in 2004. I had that question asked was 2011. All right? We're 2016 now. The call went out in 1999. All right? We've taken 16 years to produce a single document to consider the decriminalization of cannabis in this country. The CDA is defunct. Okay? Not functioning. Useless. The cannabis position papers on WikiLeaks. It means nothing.
My name is Jurgens, but I've been involved in this field from advocacy to treatment for over 27 years. Where do I enjoyed your talk? It was a different aspect. But I must say, Andre, and no, I don't want to use my and Marius, I felt quite attacked. I came here with an open mind. And a lot of work has gone into to change the stock around the war on drugs. And whether you believe it or not, doesn't really matter, but it's happening. Reality is, it is happening. You come here with a statement, hey, nothing is happening. You come with a statement attacking basically everybody. See, there is the fun. Maybe aspects, but I can tell you there are good aspects too. You talk about government defunct. Maybe some parts, but it's still my country, and I can tell you some parts of this country is looking wonderful. You talk about the police or this. No, Minia, some parts, they are bad people. And I've been on both sides. I've been attacked. But I've also been treated with utmost respect from police officers. I work with them on a daily basis, and most of them I respect. And most of them will respect my clients. My clients are absolutely down and outs that I don't think you have seen or from. So I feel that, yes, the war on drugs is changing. But I've entered a war on words. And you just continue the war. Give the facts. This last paper, it's one paper. There are so many papers. Give us the facts, but give it in a professional way. Speak to us. Treat us the way we treat our clients. We treat our clients with dignity and respect. And this is what this whole change is coming about. We must treat one another as human beings. Treat one another with dignity and respect. And you'll get that back. You might come much further with a different approach and coming out guns blazing, attacking people. I came in here with a total open mind. And I was looking, I told Bertel last night, I'm looking forward to
you know what, sometimes what you need to hear is not what you want to hear, right? I'm sorry if you feel attacked, because that's not my intention. My intention was to come here tonight and give home truths, not some, oh, let me tell you about how fantastic. This country is not changing, right? For all the talk here, there will be no change. There is no evidence that things have changed or are changing. Yeah, I'm afraid so.
Of dealing with the Central Drug Authority. The last time we were actually in engagement on the national broadcaster, David Bayer used the excuse of xenophobia as to why he hadn't managed to produce this this cannabis position paper, which is now 16 years delayed. The government then went and spent R500,000 on the cannabis roundtable, which was 9 months ago. They still haven't managed to produce the reports of the minutes of the meeting of that. In those 9 months, any one of you could have created a baby and this baby could have been born. In those same 9 months, you look at any newspaper in any town in South Africa and you will see police with people that are arrested for a plant. Now, if you think that this is going forward, then you're not looking at the front page of the newspaper.
You're not looking at the facts, what's happening here for the last 2 days.
For somebody who's sitting in jail, this is very relevant. And you're walking out of the discussion just like David Bayer. So it's clear that you don't actually want to hear the truth, however hard it is. But for someone in jail, let me tell you, it's not pretty. It's not nice.
Something I just need to raise more in a second brought up, and I'm afraid I'm a bit torn on this because I do hear your point as well. Certainly earlier, Best gave a really good presentation to us. And I think something you have to remember is there seems to be a lot of negative talk from your side about the police and things that are happening. And whilst I do know that there are certainly human rights violations, in fact tomorrow we'll be releasing a document about human rights violations, which does implicate the police in some instances. He made a valid point earlier, and it was repeated by several of our speakers, that the police are there to uphold legislation, and there are 180,000 police members, and that sometimes the instructions of how things are supposed to be done at the top don't necessarily always filter down to the people carrying out the work at the bottom. And I think we need to be very mindful of that as well. And also that the police also have children in schools, and that sometimes the police are called to come to the schools by communities.
Can I just mention something with regard to the police?
It's important that there seems to be a lot of negative talk about the press, but we're not quite maybe getting the full picture of their involvement. We need to kind of look more broadly at what.
Well, can I just mention that over the past 10 years that there has been a cannabis march in Cape Town. The police have always been invited. The organisers have always worked with the police. And in that regard, I must admit that the police and the community organisation has worked very well. But to somebody who's got a boot on their face, this is not a happy situation. And those people are underrepresented or don't have an opportunity to be represented because, hell, there's a boot on your face. Now, if anybody would like to come and try what it's like, you know, I've got boots on. I can show you. It is not pleasant. But yes, in the instances that we have worked with the police, that is nice. But then again, like Maurice explained, when they come and they cordon off a section and they raid everything, this is not functionally working for us. And as Maurice explained, it's illegal.
Well, I mean, can I, if I could maybe, I'm conflicted with this.
Good.
My name is Ashley.
Good. It's good to be conflicted.
And yeah, I think it's a good opportunity to have a robust discussion. But I think what the previous speaker had said and my colleague, I work with the police quite often as well. I'm on the CPF as in a community that you referred to, Mitchell's Plain. I work in the cells. I do a lot of work with treatment as well. I run a treatment center. The challenge is not so much the content that you're bringing across. The challenge is the way that you're bringing it across. I think as much as, I mean, you could say if the mayor, whatever it is, the reality is I can give you statistical proof that what she's done has given opportunity for people to access treatment because there was a lack of awareness. So as much as there is the negative connotation for her putting a face on that billboard, there is also an argument for through various papers.
I'm gonna walk out. Sorry, I gotta go.
Thank you very much. Okay.
So I'm saying we need this vigorous conversation. We need this robust debate around.
There are lots of very well-meaning people here and pushing rehab, and that's fine. But you know something. Let me just put something on the table. What percentage of people do you think who are arrested go through the courts and end up at rehab? What percentage?
I agree with you. No. I mean, we fight the clerks of the court.
No. I'm not going to argue with you. I'm asking you for your percentage because of all the number of people who are arrested, okay, it's all mechanistic. It's all sentences.
Court-driven.
300 Rand, 2 weeks in prison. 300 Rand, 2 weeks in prison. It's not rehab. It's less than 0.5% of people go to rehab.
So again,
I don't know what you're talking
CDA talk about the negative. We can talk about the positive around the CDA, implementing the LDACs, ensuring that there is community, participation in processes like that. We have LDACs that are in prison as a part of the. My responsibility as a CPF member or executive member is to provide oversight. So I would go into your Woodstock with Brigadier cells, and I would check the prison cells. I would check that there is enough resources. I would check humanity or.
So why does Woodstock have targets if they're not supposed to have targets?
I can't argue that. That's
No,
the police.
the oversight.
And I'd just like to comment about the mayor and the premier. The Western Cape government's in a very particular, interesting situation. We're the only province that has both a female mayor and a female premier. It is the province that has the highest fast birth rates in the world. And I challenge any one of you here to show me where Helen Ziller or Patricia de Lille has ever mentioned facts.
We're over 10%. 10% of people born in this province are being born mentally deficient, mentally retarded. The government's done nothing. I propose that they make providing alcohol to a pregnant woman illegal. And no. So I mean, seriously, you can talk, but you have to be serious about these drugs.
I'd just like to point out, because the female health thing was brought up, female rights. We have two female heads of state that could bring this up and say, look, FAS and fetal alcohol syndrome is a female sexual health issue. They've had this opportunity for years. They've not mentioned it once. And this is a failing on both their behalves. And, I'm sorry, I don't think a pretty poster once every 5 years, it's not like this was the first one. I don't know if you remember the one prior to that. Don't start, be smart, drug-free is the way to be. There was even a video that came out with that. Now, did that help? Another thing I'd just like to bring up is last year, both Helen Ziller and Patricia de Lille authorized the removal of 6 million Rand from education to fight drugs and crime. Did that 6 million Rand make a difference? Are we getting anywhere for the value of money that we're spending on this topic, that our leaders are choosing to spend on this topic? And with that, I think the battery's dead and we're out. Thanks, folks. Oh my God.